Hello, welcome to Signum Academy on Twitch. There it is, going off into the abyss. Yeah, I need to go back and forth and check that chat from time to time, and I hope that you guys are hearing me okay. This is Wesley. Gosh, it feels like a while since I did our last discussion. Was it just on the Brothers Grimm? I feel like so much has happened. So much is continually happening these days. But so last month, September, we talked all about the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, and specifically how Philip Pullman has retold, adapted them, some interesting kinds of connections, similarities, differences, things about his versions of those, and things about the stories that make them timeless. No one can tire of those stories, I think. And so it's lovely that he's put out such a great retelling of them. Maybe you can tell Philip Pullman and I, we get along real well. He's really my favorite author, I think, certainly as far as people who are still alive. And that's why I wanted to spend this fall in Signum Academy really looking at some of Philip Pullman's less well-known books. As stories go, Clockwork is one of his one of what might be closest to a fairy tale of the stories that he has created for himself. And so this quote here, it comes from his description of the book that's on his webpage, or maybe it's on an old version of the webpage. But anyway, about the book, he says, "This took a lot of working out. I was looking at one of the old clocks in the Science Museum in London one day, and I thought it would be fun to try and write a story in which one part, turning this way, connected to another part and made it turn that way, like the cogwheels of a clock. And when it was all fitted closely together, I could wind it up and set it going. Of course, it had to be spooky too, because old clocks are somehow." And so you got the very spooky image here for the cover of the British version, the UK version, I think. So my cover's a little different. I think I showed it to you guys in a previous slide. It's probably easier to see there, but I've got this other equally spooky, maybe even more spooky version. But I think you can see pretty clearly what we've got going on here is a connection between the idea of clockwork, of these gears and cogwheels, the different teeth that fit together perfectly, right? And so when one turns, it turns the other ones, right? And that is classically, or for a long time anyway, naturally seems to be an image for the way that cause and effect work. The way that things happen is one thing moves over here, it moves something else over here, and then stuff occurs in a clock. If you guys have like cuckoo clocks at home or something, an old clock, maybe a bird will come out and sing, right? And maybe in this case, in the great clock of the story, there's a figure of death that comes out. Now, in The Golden Compass, Philip Pullman's really famous book called Northern Lights in the UK, you have the connection of time in the form of an hourglass connected with death, because there's a skull, really tiny one, above the hourglass image on The Golden Compass. So when Lyra's learning to read it, one of the first things, if not the first thing she realizes about the meaning of the alethiometer is that the time symbol is connected with death. That's a very basic, a fundamental association to make there. So I guess that's maybe part of why Philip Pullman thinks that old clocks are spooky. They also have that kind of tick-tock sound, which is very similar to the beating of a heart, and that's a connection that's pretty important in the story here. So the connection of clocks with time, with death and life. You can see how this could be a really interesting idea for a story, I think. One other little detail about this that I really like. So in the second book of his Dark Materials trilogy, The Subtle Knife, there's a scene where Lyra, the hero of the story, the protagonist, she's in a museum and she's looking at things and she's making discoveries. So it's kind of the same idea, I guess, that Philip Pullman actually does go to museums and kind of gets ideas there. He's really interested in art. Clearly, he's also really interested in science and how things work. He's very much talks about writing stories as a kind of craft, a making process that he's involved in. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff to go with this little story. It's a very short book. I hope you guys are able to find a copy of it out there. It's got to be pretty cheap, I would think. Hardly 100 pages, maybe less. So longer than a fairy tale, but way, way shorter than his Dark Materials, the Golden Compass and those books. So really worth a look. The two editions, I know this picture is really fuzzy. I tried to take it from the illustrator's website because I thought that would be, more respectful or something. But it's not the best quality, which is kind of ironic. So sorry about that. But anyway, there's sort of two main editions. Again, the US editions have these really kind of smoky images in them for the illustrations that are really great and really creepy. I like the US edition a lot. I guess I'm biased, it's the one I'm used to. And those are by an illustrator named Leonid Gore, or Gore. And then the UK ones are all by Peter Bailey, a very great illustrator. They're sort of more light and bright somehow, the colors. Obviously it's black and white, but I feel like the white sort of jumps out more, at least in his images. They're very distinct, they're very clear, and they're nice. Now, all the illustrations in this book also have really important captions or like little subtitles. I don't know what you call them. And I'm pretty sure that these captions are written by Philip Pullman himself. And now, the thing about the US edition is that it doesn't actually have all of these captions, which is a little frustrating for the reader. If you're like me, if you like everything that Philip Pullman writes, you really want to see all of the words that are supposed to be in the book. So I don't know what the U.S. publisher was thinking when they cut out a lot of that. I think that they've got some of it maybe, but it seems like they left out a lot. It's unfortunate. So if I had to make a choice, I might recommend the UK edition. I don't know. Is anybody out there who's actually had a chance to read this book yet? If you have, pop it in the chat. I know a lot of people seem to watch this after the fact, so it's tough to get a lot of feedback on the spot. So we'll talk about some different editions and things later too. Now, a little more about this story as far as the background. So somebody asks, this author Sarah Perry asks Philip Pullman, what would you most like to be remembered for? He answers, it would have to be a book. I don't think I'd want to be remembered for anything else. I suppose I might be remembered for his Dark Materials and maybe the Book of Dust when it's finished, because they're big and they've been read by a lot of people. But I think I've said this before, I'd most like to be remembered for a book called Clockwork. And then the follow-up question from another author, S.F. Said, why do you pick Clockwork out of all your work? He answers, "It is the most perfectly constructed story. It's short, which helps. I'm very fond of it. I think it works in all the ways a story should work." So when Philip Pullman is asked about his own books, he generally doesn't say a whole lot in specific. He talks about how he wants the reader to sort of have the freedom to read and interpret the story how they want to. But when there's a direct question like this, he does give an answer. And I think it's really interesting that he, again, has this contrast between the big books, his Dark Materials, the Book of Dust, and this short book, Clockwork. And he actually thinks that maybe he'd best like to be remembered for the short book. I think that's really interesting. I think I mentioned last time, Philip Pullman was a teacher. He's very used to telling stories in person, right? And he's used to telling stories to kids, to his own kids, he talks about that, and to his kids in his classes. And of course, now he's famous, he goes around and gives talks, and he always takes questions from little kids in the audience and answers them really in just the same way that he answers questions from the adults. He's very down to earth in that way. And so he's used to telling big stories. He's famous for writing big stories. And as a teacher, he taught great classical myths and stories like that. The story of the Trojan War and Odysseus and his journeys, these kind of epics. But then he also clearly loves really short stories too. The fairy tales, he talks about how important those are, especially the Brothers Grimm stories and the Arabian Nights stories. So this idea that you can get a great story that comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, right? You can have big ones, and he loves those, but maybe he actually prefers the little ones. He says that this is his most perfectly constructed story. And when you're trying to make something perfect, it sounds like if you make something small, that can really help, because you just have more control, you have more time to go into the little details. It's very much like the difference between making a great big machine, lots of moving parts, where lots can go wrong, and making something really small, really delicate, really fine. Now again, Philip Pullman has a scene, several scenes in The Golden Compass and his Dark Materials, where Lyra is dealing with very, very small, very fine instruments. There's the Golden Compass itself, the alethiometer that tells her true things when she asks it questions, and when she reads it. It's very, very beautiful, very delicate, and it seems to work by essentially because magic, but it also seems to have very delicate machinery working inside of it. And if you've seen like any of the TV versions, they show that kind of clockwork image a lot. But there's also sort of the negative side of that. There's really evil machinery too in those books. And one example is this little spy fly. It's a kind of clockwork devil that will never stop chasing after the person that has been sent to go and look for. And so one thing that happens in the story is they catch one of the spy flies. It's after Lyra, and they get the armored bear to put it in a little container that's made to look just like the container that has the alethiometer. Right? So there's a kind of interesting yin and yang, kind of good and evil, light and dark thing going on there. And I think, there's lots of interesting connections here with Philip Pullman's books. There's some interesting connections with other books too. Obviously, he thinks of this as a fairy tale, talks about it as a fairy tale. It starts with Once Upon a Time. So there's the Brothers Grimm, and I think this goes nicely with that. There's the story of Faust. This is told by many authors In German, it's by Goethe. It's a big poem, kind of play almost. Um, and in English, the writer Christopher Marlowe, who's like around the time of Shakespeare, and that's the one that Pullman chooses for his epigraph to the start of this book. It says, "The stars move still, time runs, the clock will strike, the devil will come, and Faustus must be damned." It's in the play Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. So you see different versions of the name. The name of the devil that comes and messes with Faust, that he tries to work with, I guess, is called Mephistopheles. This is a wonderful word. In English, we have the word Mephistophelian, someone related to Mephistopheles, the tempter, the devil. And we have the word Faustian also for someone who tries to deal with the devil to get some benefit from it. So this image comes from an artist named Sim. So that's why I put that in parentheses there. But there's many versions of the story. Somebody, again, who sells their soul. That's a Faustian bargain. They give up something of infinite value. In exchange, they're hoping to get something of tangible value. Let's say, something they can touch, something they can benefit from in some way. Okay? So this is a really interesting image. If you get a chance to read Philip Pullman's new book, in the Book of Dust series, it deals with a few sort of Faustian characters. They're kind of alchemists. They're working on something that's like science, but more like magic, maybe. Very dark, very mysterious, very spooky. And I think he's clearly inspired by that story. Now, other places he talks about one of his favorite books, and he argues that maybe this is the best book in the British children's stories tradition. The best young adult novel, we would call it now, right? He says is Philippa Pierce's Tom's Midnight Garden. And it's kind of funny because they both have the same initials, PP, Philip Pullman, Philippa Pierce. I think that one of Philip Pullman's kids is actually named Tom, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know. I don't know if he was that influenced by the book or if that's like a family name or something. But anyway, Tom's Midnight Garden is a really lovely book. It deals with time and actually kind of like time travel. It deals with the idea of, magical events that have a connection to the power of life and death and to love, and affection and friendship. And these are very, very important themes in all Pullman's work, but especially, you can see them in Clockwork. So the kind of the different ways that time works, that trust and stories work. This is the kind of stuff that you get in a great story like Tom's Midnight Garden. So that's worth looking up if you've never heard of it. The last one I put on here is Frankenstein. Again, we're in October, Halloween is coming up, and definitely one of the most famous spooky stories, right, is the story of Frankenstein's monster. Right? So just to be, correct about this stuff, that picture is not Frankenstein. That is Frankenstein's monster, or Frankenstein's creation. Maybe it's not right to call him a monster even. But anyway, the person that Dr. Frankenstein makes, you can see him bolted together through the neck and kind of sewn together all around. It's the idea, again, is taking parts, putting them together, and making something alive, right? So this kind of blending between science and magic, or anyway, the force of life, whatever that is, right? Whether it includes the soul, whether it includes the brain, the heart, again, sort of mysterious, and makes for interesting stories. So the original Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, still one of the great classic stories, works of literature. Really worth a read if you're looking for a big book, a big story that'll challenge you. I highly recommend Frankenstein. All right. Now, in this story, I don't want to go into it too much right now. I want to give people as much time as possible to read it, so I don't spoil stuff in the story. So today, I'm not going to really talk about. This is strange, maybe. I'm not going to talk about the actual story of Clockwork much at all. I just kind of want to give you guys some extra stuff, interesting stuff about the story and about the book. And so for next time, we're going to kind of look at, in more specific detail, at stuff that happens in Clockwork. But one of the really interesting things about this book, and I don't know, I haven't been able to find an answer to this question, but you come to a part in this book pretty early where there is a bit of music that appears, little musical notes. Here it is, I think. So in my book, it's on page 39. I couldn't find a picture of this online anywhere, and that's always surprising to me when I'm looking for something and it's not online. So maybe I just didn't look hard enough, but I didn't want to take a picture and upload it. I feel weird about doing that, so I'll just show you like this. So this is the music, and it's whistled by the characters in the story. In a number of parts of the story, it becomes important. And the first time it's whistled is by Dr. Calmenius, the clockwork maker of the story. Kind of the Faust or even the Mephistopheles figure, kind of the devil figure in the story. And he says it's a little tune called The Flowers of Lapland. Okay, so I couldn't find out if this is a real song, like, a traditional song from somewhere, a folk song or something, or if this is a song that Philip Pullman made up. And because I couldn't find out, I kind of lean towards it must be something that Pullman wrote. So that's kind of neat, that he's not just a writer of stories, but apparently he writes music too. It's very short. It's only a few bars of music, but it's very pretty. And so I'm gonna try to play it for you. So I don't think I can whistle on tune very well, but I've got the piano here. So here's the song, The Flowers of Lapland. Once more. So it's I'm probably playing it too slowly there. It's this kind of waltz, it's in 3/4 time, I'm pretty sure, or at least that's how my counting works on this. Oh no, not 3/4, 6/8. It specifies there for you. So it's in a essentially it's like 3/4 time. I don't know music that well, but it's got a kind of swaying rhythm to it. It's got that big jump from a low note up to a high note over an octave, right? So more than an octave jump, which is very surprising, I think, is the feeling I get from that. And yet the pieces of the song kind of fit together nicely. They follow a nice pattern. And again, it's got this very haunting feel to it, for me anyway. I can see why it's called The Flowers of Lapland. They're these very delicate, very beautiful flowers that bloom. And Lapland is like up in, Sweden. It's up in the far north. It's very cold, very much, pine trees and stuff. But these flowers will bloom in the meadows there. And they're very tough, but also very delicate. So in the Golden Compass, you have the characters, the witches, who come from that region of the north. And the queen of the witches is Serafina Pekkala. It's a name that Pullman picked out in a Swedish phone book, I think he says. And she has flowers that are in her crown. And there's a very nice kind of backstory where when she was younger, witches lived for a very long time, but when she was younger, and when Father Coram was younger, and he's the one who kind of helps Lyra learn about the alethiometer, kind of like a grandfather figure. But when he was a young man, he saved Serafina Pekkala's life, and so they fell in love, and there's this whole kind of very sad romantic story there. But now that he's very old, and he goes searching for the witches again, he still has this connection. And in another character's case, that connection comes in the form of a flower from her crown that she gives this character, that the character can use to call on the witches if he's in need. He can call to Serafina Pekkala with that flower. So I love this image of the flowers of Lapland kind of being this connection between the big book and the little book here, this little bar of music. So just one more thing for today before I let you guys go. There's an opera version, which I hadn't known about before, but I was reading about the stuff out there about Clockwork. So maybe you can find some recordings of that if you look hard enough. I'm not sure if that's something that was, recorded at some point, but there was a live action, musical or opera essentially of the story Clockwork. And of course there's also translations out there. And in my day job, normally it would be my day job, but now it's not so much. I teach a lot of Spanish classes, and this picture here is from the Spanish version, the cover of the Spanish version of the same book here, but they call it The Mechanical Clock. So right from the title, you can see it's not quite the same story. And so I actually have a copy of this book in Spanish. There it is. So it's a different cover again, but same text as far as I know. This one has the pictures by Peter Bailey, and it has those captions. So I can finally see what all the words that Philip Pullman put in this story are supposed to be. Only I get them in Spanish, so they might be a little off. But you get the gist. And so I would just recommend that to you guys. If you're learning another language, one of the best ways to get really good practice and really challenge yourself is to read a story that you know well, and maybe that you have a copy of in English. So you've got your English story, and you read that story in a Spanish translation, or if you're learning Chinese or whatever language, right? You read it in the translation. That way, you can really focus on the words and the sentences and the meanings, and not worry too much about what's going on, because you already kind of know the story. If you see what I mean, you can kind of focus better on the language because the story's already internalized. So I've had a lot of fun reading books in other languages, but I really get more out of it if I already know what the story is. So I'm not so lost if I don't know a word or two. I can still kind of figure out what's happening. I think it's a great way to learn a new language. So if that's something you like doing, I recommend it be a short story at first, so you're not overwhelmed, and as perfect a story as you can imagine. And this is close to a perfect story. I would agree with Pullman. I don't think it's quite perfect. I'm not going to go that far. I'm not that big of a Pullman fan that there's no flaws. I wouldn't say that, but it's very good. It's a wonderful introduction to Philip Pullman's own fairy tales, the ones he made up. And so we're going to look at it more closely like what actually happens in the story, we're going to look at that next time. Okay? So I've hopefully given you some interesting kind of rabbit holes to go down with Clockwork, things to come back to, once you read the story and you want to see a little more about it. And again, I really hope you enjoy this one. It's one of my favorites. And I'll talk to you guys again not next week, but the following week. So, a couple weeks here. All right. I'll see you all then.